Good afternoon or good evening. This is a special day because I'm here with a friend, Lenore Hirsch, and her first collection of short stories is out, and it's called Connection. And we're going to talk about it for half an hour. The first one I read was 2017 was Joyride, and Joyride is in here, and I wanted to reread it, and I reread it, and you know, it's like a musical piece that you know every note is just the right note, and somehow it creates a symphony or an etude or something of that nature. But that short story does, and you're going to read a short story at some point. We'll figure out in the show.
So I just want to say about Joyride that every story, the production of each one is different. Sometimes I completely know what it is I want to do. Mm-hmm. I mean, the story in here that's called One Day in September came from me picking up a newspaper and seeing 3 tragic things happening in different places on the planet on the same day. And I thought, I want to try to write a story about that. Yeah. And so I kind of knew ahead of time what I wanted to do. Joyride was really interesting because I wanted to write something about people trying to cross a border illegally. Mm-hmm. But I had no idea what was going to happen when that young girl, totally dependent on this kind of icky guy who was the driver taking people's money to take them across the border. I had no idea what she was going to do when they got to the border, and then it just happened. Mm-hmm. And that, for me, that is the greatest pleasure in writing, is having the story decide where it wants to go. Furthermore, everybody who writes needs to read their work out loud, because only by reading out loud do you get whether the flow works. Yeah. You know, your sentence is so long that you have to stop in the middle of the sentence to take a breath. That might not be a good idea. One of the stories in here, the one which is one of my favorites, called Confession, is really interesting to me because I wrote it by dictation. I got the idea for the story, and then it was late in the evening, and the thoughts were coming, and I just said, okay, I'm going to take my phone, and I'm going to lie down here on the bed, and I'm going to just say the story into the phone. So I did the whole story that way. It's not terribly long, but afterwards, then I had to transcribe it, and then, of course, I had to make changes because it sounded like a radio play and not something you would read. But I think there's a quality to the way the narrator kind of stops and starts and stops and starts that's in the written version of it that is only there because I did it by dictation. It's a person making a confession, and so it's not smooth. It's like, well, here's what happened, and well, So anyway, that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I always read everything out loud as I'm writing.
Let's read it.
Read a story?
Sure.
Okay, so the one I'm going to read, memorial service. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Parking in this town is such a bitch, I mutter as I drive around the block at the funeral home. I wedge my car in between 2 SUVs, hoping neither of them will hit me, and hurry towards the huge building. Everybody knows Smith and Claiborne, but I've only been here once before. The main entrance is around the corner, but I see an open door nearby and decide to slip in there. I step into a small room full of mourners. At one end is a spray of white and pink flowers next to a table with a framed photograph of a gray-haired lady and a sign that reads, Nancy Bishop. I'm clearly in the wrong place, but people are smiling and thanking me for coming. A handsome guy with silky straight black hair halfway down his back and a flowing robe is walking around shaking incense. His glance is soft and welcoming. I sit down holding the package of South American weavings I have brought for a friend. I can't see how I can just get up and leave. The guy with the incense comes over to me and looks at the weavings. He touches the one on top that shows a Mayan temple surrounded by trees and flowers. This is just what I need, he says, and takes it from me with gentle insistence. He stands next to the table with the portrait and begins. Incense guy chants in a language I don't recognize with a deep and compelling voice. He holds the weaving up to all 4 corners of the room. Everyone is silent, their attention riveted on him. He stops, pauses while he makes eye contact with each attendee, then speaks. You may mourn the loss of our dear friend Nancy, whom you feel has left us, but I assure you she is here with us now. She is in the air we breathe, the sounds we hear, the food we eat, the water we drink. She is part of the one, the all, the universe of living things. Nancy loved you. I will pass the talking stick so you can each say something about Nancy. Don't hesitate. Your words will go out into the universe to her. He takes a feathered stick from his pocket and passes it to a person in the first row. I've got to get out of here. Mm-hmm. But how insulting for me to rise and depart in front of all these caring people. I stare at Nancy's photograph. She is smiling, not broadly, but with a hint of mischief. She wears dangling earrings of silver and turquoise. Perhaps she was part Native American, or maybe she spent time in the Southwest. I am half listening as the stick passes from person to person. She babysat me when I was little and told me funny stories. We traveled to Paris. We had a great time walking all day to see the sights. One woman sobs, I'm going to miss her so much. I try to listen for any bit of information about those earrings. I can say some mundane thing like we knew each other from school, but that seems uninspired. Before I can get my wandering mind to gather words, the man next to me is holding the stick and going on and on. Nancy took care of me when I was sick. She checked on me daily, brought me soup, offered to drive me to the doctor. Give me a break. Nobody is that much of a saint. And suddenly he passes the stick. I take it in both hands and turn it over and over, feeling the rough bark that is peeling and the soft feathers brushing my wrists. I look around at the gathering and up to Incense Guy, who smiles serenely. I clear my throat. Gesturing at the portrait, I say, she stole those earrings from me. There is an intake of breath throughout the room and all eyes are on me. I don't know where those words came from. They just came. I can't leave it like this. But we were good friends, I add. I stole things from her too. I rise from my seat, fumbling with the weavings, dropping the talking stick. I stumble to the door and push it open. The door snaps closed behind me. I inhale deeply from the air that is Nancy, that is me, that is everything.
There's a Seinfeld clip there. I mean, it's a Seinfeld freak accident somehow or other. No, it's beautiful.
Well, that's just kind of for fun. But I love the fact that I didn't know what my character was going to say until the words came out of me. So that's just fun.
Well, that's the fun of creating on a typewriter, or as we used to be in the old days. And you'd misdo a word, and instead of Herman Melville, you got Merman Melville. And I said, I'd like that better. Let's keep going with that and keep going. And Steve Allen at one time used to write music according to birds on the wires outside his house. He'd look at the birds and say, let me do this. Yeah, let me do this. How about this? How about that?
That's great. That's great.
But inspiration, everybody says inspiration, that's fine. Perspiration is 99%, and inspiration is 1%. And you started by saying you are reworking a story for over 10 years.
Oh, yeah. One of these stories, the first one in the book, that's about a teacher married to a guy who's a chef, and they're currently kind of in two different places because he has this new wonderful job, and she's supposed to be quitting her job and moving and getting pregnant, and she really doesn't want to do it.
Right.
Well, the first time I wrote that, which I don't know how many years ago that was, it was like equal parts woman and guy. So I had no problem expressing the views of this woman who really wants her own independent career in life, even though she loves the guy. It was a little harder to express the point of view of the guy who's the chef, and then going through the machinations of how is he going to solve his problem of not having enough time. And so I'm doing all this research about how restaurants
but he's packing
work.
Her boxes.
Well, yeah, but in the first version of the story, it was equally about each of them, and then there's this sweet little resolution at the end where he hires somebody, and so he has more time, and everything ends on this happy note. And it was kind of like, no, that's just so. Let's just make it. Let's just make it her story, and have her do what she thinks she needs for herself. And what happens to the relationship, that's not decided. She just decides she's not going to quit her job.
Okay, so there's no single one character in any of the stories that you'd say, this one is me or with variations of me that I'd put into another story as a continuation of the story, or rather, you just rather write another short story?
Yeah, no, I mean, they're all, what I love about my short stories is they're all me. Mm-hmm. I mean, if somebody wanted to understand me better, I would tell them, read these stories. Because there's stories here about refugees suffering.
Yeah.
There's stories here about parental relationships with their children. I just reread this morning this one that isn't really much of a story, but this Lenore on Empty, about the old woman who just she's irritated with a daughter who's trying to help her. She wants to do everything herself, but she really can't. And she's just kind of done.
Yeah, and
I totally, I'm not saying I'm there now, but I get that you get to that point.
She's done. So do you want to talk about what you're writing now? Because you had a particularly exciting time in Seville this year.
Yeah, well, so we can talk about that a little bit. Yeah, so I had a terrible freak accident on a bus in Seville when I was with a tour group, traveling alone, but with a group of people and a wonderful tour guide, where I fell. And because my leg caught on something, I broke my femur and spent the next 2 weeks in a hospital, had surgery, flat on my back for 11 days, unable to sit up, get up, roll over. Anyway, that was pretty terrible.
Yeah.
But it makes a good story.
And you got 5,000 words.
Yes, and I wanted, when I got home, I wanted to write it down because I didn't want to forget the details. And I had, not that I did any writing while I was there. Well, I did write a poem about getting transfused. Mm-hmm. That was a very moving experience. But I wanted to remember all the details. And I had text messages and emails, all the kinds of communication I'd been doing to help me anchor what happened on each day. And so I wrote it all down day by day, and it's on my website. If anybody's interested, it's under the menu item mentions Seville. And it's a day by day, blow by blow account of what that was like. Really, really interesting.
You don't know where your ideas are going to come from. I think you said to me once, you said, I'm going to go for a walk. How can I turn that into a story? I'm paraphrasing maybe somehow.
Yeah.
And just said, what could I find on my walk that I could turn into a story?
Exactly.
And you did?
Yeah. So I have a story here that what happens when you're on a walk. Another one, what happens if you're on a bike ride. Another one is what happens if you're cruising the deck of a cruise ship.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one.
And what if you're out driving your car and you come upon a car stopped by the side of the road? Yeah. What could happen in any of those circumstances that might change your life? So that was kind of fun.
And everybody out here can do that in one form or another.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Creativity is just a fabulous thing.
Two advices for possible writers out here.
Oh, advice from me? Mm-hmm. Well, you got to base, that what they always say is get your butt in the chair.
Yeah.
You got to just do it.
Yeah.
And for me, the way of ensuring that I do that is to either take a class or get with a group of other people who meet every week or so to read each other's stuff, because then you have to write something to give them.
Yeah.
Go for a walk and just let your mind wander, because I get a lot of, some of the poetry that I write comes when I'm just out walking and listening to the birds and looking at the sunshine and looking at people, and the ideas just come to you.
Yeah.
So you have to have, I'm sure someone famous said that you have to have downtime and space for creativity to happen. Mm-hmm. You can't be running around constantly every day, all day, doing various tasks and expect to have a creative thought.